Hello, and welcome to the video teaser for episode 3 of our monthly blog series on the digital fluency topics featured in our Houston-based Finding Alternative Futures Phase 2 or FAF2 project. This project examines digital readiness and easily available technologies that can help move the Houston and greater Texas and greater museum community forward. This month, our Houston cohort will be working with FAF fellow Lindsay Richardson, where they're exploring the importance of operational capacity and continuity. So coming from our online public programming into kind of the nuts and bolts on how to get that going in a museum. I am joined again today by our museum scholar in residence, Ed Rodley from the Experienced Alchemist. Hello, Ed.
Hey, Alex, how's it going?
Doing well. Getting started with the academic year, which is a little rocky, but it seems like things are getting a little bit better. But with our Houston cohort, the next module that they're going to be going into revolves around operational capacity and continuity. So what does that mean? So for us, transitioning towards increasingly digital enabled operations requires establishing new priorities and policies for business continuity. So basically, you're doing all this online public programming stuff, all this virtual well, we need to think about, what does that require in terms of staffing and policies and really rethinking how we do things, because it's always been so much about object or place-basedness and visitors being in front of you. But now that we're looking at creating these other opportunities to connect with people, this is an important area to focus on. So within the courses, this module that we're working on, there's 3 essential competencies that we're going to be focused on. And one of them revolves around assembling cross-functional teams. So Ed, what does that mean to you in terms of assembling a cross-functional team, and how can people learn more about that?
Well, so one of the things that you're starting to see and that the pandemic has really exacerbated is the migration of digital engagement from being kind of a fringe activity to being one that has moved more into the core of museum work. So whereas in the past, you could sort of rely on, that was something that those people took care of. It is now becoming so much a part of every single person's job that digital has its fingers in programming, in curation and collections and visitor services. So in order to build and maintain successful digital projects nowadays, you really need to have this kind of deeply cross-functional teams working on these projects. It's not something that can really stand alone in its little digital silo in ways that it might have done in the past. A couple of the reports that we will mention in the post give you sort of a great snapshot of sort of the before and after of the way museums were looking at this during the pandemic. The Knight Foundation did a great digital readiness and innovation report that sort of spells out sort of what 2019 looked like in terms of digital practice in museums, and a lot of the things they acknowledge as challenges to the field will be familiar to everybody. Short staffing, not a lot of budget, things that being run as pilot projects that don't have a really clear lifespan or a way to scale. So that's a good thing to look at, because it will certainly make you feel better if you are one of those museums that feel like our digital game, it's not really up to snuff, because really almost nobody's is. So that's definitely worth taking a look at. And then the American Alliance of Museums published earlier this year their sort of look at what it means to adapt to this hybrid reality, right? Where you're doing things, museums are starting to reopen, so you've got all of the physical work that you have done traditionally. You've got all of this digital work that was done during the pandemic, and then what is the future going to look like where neither of these are going to go away? So how do you adapt to that hybrid reality? And they have a lot of really good actionable points in there about things like assembling cross-functional teams, making sure those teams are sort of right-sized, right? It can't be every single person in the organization. So how do you prioritize how many people are sitting around the table trying to figure out stuff? And what I like about the AAM report is they also talk a lot about mindset, because really we've talked about this before, Alex, right? This is really a shift of mindset as much as it is of anything else. This notion that digital is now basically a part of everything, and it's not a separate thing in the way that it used to be before. And what does that look like? And the AAM report provides a lot of specific examples, like these people are doing X, these people are doing Y. So that is something I would definitely point people at.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Ed. I've been talking to folks about where we are within these new virtual programs and bringing people back in. And I said, yeah, when we got to May and June, we're like, oh, threw the masks off, popping champagne bottles, and like, okay, we go back to how things were. And then the Delta variant came out, and we pick up your mask again, and you're worried about who you shared that champagne bottle with. But so now with this protracted time, we are developing more and more resources, and we're building new audiences. So much as we wanted to go back into time, it is turning into a hybrid future that we need to think about now. That's the one thing that we can plan for. So I think that the work that we're doing now is where it is sustainable.
Yeah, and I think the more you're able to actually work on the mindset change, then that allows you to be not just reactive. Like, what's happening this week? Are we open? Are we closed? Okay, panic, do this. Okay, that will change next week. What do we do? Panic, do something different. If you are able to actually think in terms of that hybrid reality, then it makes it a lot easier to respond to those things in a way that becomes less reactive and more sort of, it grows, right? You're able to do something and then do something else on top of that. And it seems like there is a much greater chance for having that work scale and progress rather than just be a series of one-off reactions.
Right. Which, I mean, is kind of the hallmark of some of the earlier experimentations within the museum digital world, is these one-offs. Everyone had an app. I don't think I have any museum apps on my phone anymore. Next, our second competency is around, okay, it's, do you build or buy or hire or train? Like, so establishing sustainable support for digital operations. So really understanding, do you have the staff? Do you get help for it? Do you get help from professionals? Do you crowdsource it? How do you do that? So that's one of the areas that we're looking at within this module. What are your thoughts on that hiring or skilling staff?
Well, one of the things I think that will become clear probably within the next year or so is that you are going to see a lot of organizations try to figure out how to make that move from thinking of digital as a capital expenditure to digital being an operational expenditure, right? As opposed to, this is a project, we put some money aside once to fund this thing, to hire some people, to do some stuff, but it doesn't actually impact the bottom line of the organization. The hybrid reality is really going to force pretty much everybody to think about how much of this are we able to move into our core operating expenses. It's going to be just the cost of doing business in 2022 and 23 and 24 and going forward. And a lot of that mindset shift is going to be around getting out of that sense of thinking of digital projects as one-offs and more as core responsibilities of the organization. So that immediately then starts you thinking about, okay, who, what positions do we need to hire for? What things can we actually outsource versus what are things we need to bring in-house, or if not bring in-house, who do we need to train to get these skills? One of the things I think that this current age has taught us is that nobody anywhere has all of the skills they're going to need for their career, right? Regardless of how smart we think the 25-year-olds are with their understanding of the current crop of technologies, we know in 5 years there's going to be a new crop, and those 25-year-olds are going to be 5 years out of date with those technologies. So what do? So part of the organizational capacity has to do with building in the idea of upskilling. Like, how do you actually make the staff that you have do as much as they are able to do and learn the new skills that they're going to need to learn again and again and again as technology progresses, as well as figure out who are the new people that you need to have on staff to do things that you just can't. And a lot of it is stuff that we can actually do. A lot of the core competencies that museums already have are things that translate really well into the digital realm already. So it's not a case of, oh my God, we need to hire dozens of programmers to do stuff. Probably 70 to 80% of the stuff you need, you already have, if you can actually work with the staff you have to learn the skills to be able to translate that material into the digital.
Yeah, and so the other side of this this module is based on, so we were talking about capacity, but the other part is about continuity. And you hit on that point, important point is, you may have staff that come in that have the skills that can do stuff and then they leave. Or how do you build it so that you can maintain continuity at your own institution? So what the other competency we're looking at is building operational continuity through internal communication and knowledge management systems. So this is like, what kind of documentation can we have in place so that if we're missing a piece, we can fill that gap easily. So what are your thoughts on the continuity piece of this module?
Well, so I think one of the things that actually we have working in our favor as museums is there is already this built-in mindset that keeping track of information is a thing that we're really good at in certain aspects, right? When it comes to collections objects for institutions that collect, we are really good at hanging on to that knowledge. Like you go into you go into a CMS and you look at the history of an object's experience as a museum object, and depending on how old your organization is, that information stretches back decades. However, if it's a lecture that happened last year, chances are good that it might leave no trace behind at all, other than a file sitting on somebody's computer somewhere, or a tape on a bookshelf somewhere. So for me, I think the biggest part of hanging on to that information is applying that same level of rigor to other classes of content that we produce. I was just on a call this morning with a potential client that was not a collecting museum, talking about what to do about their archives, and I pointed out that there is no such thing as a non-collecting museum. What we consider the collection is very specific, but in this case, this museum had years and years and years of videotaped performances and lectures and other kinds of digital assets that can benefit from that same kind of care that we give to collections objects. And there are platforms out there designed specifically to allow you to do that. So being able to figure out how to think about repositories, right? Places you pour information about stuff, so that you can get at them whenever you need to, I think becomes hugely important. And the one example that I mentioned in the post is the Cooper Hewitt Museum, which did a lot of work during their long closure and reinvention in terms of thinking about what software developers call their software stack. So all of the programs that have to talk to one another in order to create sort of rich digital experiences. And they all begin at the very baseline with repositories. Where do you store information? And we do this all already anyway. Your membership department probably has some kind of customer relationship management software. Your collections person or people have a collections management system. Sophisticated folks have digital asset management systems. And all of those repositories, if you think about all of the work you do in terms of feeding those repositories, gives you the ability then to pull information back out of them into the future in ways that you can't even predict now. Whereas the old model of having everything be a one-off project, you wind up building these boxes that contain content, and eventually those boxes either disappear. All the museums that made Flash interactives, Adobe Flash has been deprecated by Adobe, and all of that content is locked in boxes that nobody can open anymore. Or somebody quits and they take all of the information that was on their computer, even if it's still in your museum, no one knows that it's there, which is basically the same thing as it not existing. Whereas in repositories, it's findable. And if you can create systems where you're able to think first and foremost about content going into repositories, then you can get that content out years later. And you can let people have access to it in a number of different ways that doesn't require, okay, I know the curator who worked on the project is X. I'm going to give them a call and ask them if they remember who filmed that talk that we gave at the opening, the usual sleuthing that winds up happening when you're scrounging for digital assets without that kind of system where you can search and find things.
Yeah, I think that that graphic that we have as part of the post is really helpful to kind of understand how one way to organize that content. So you're very mindful of where to find that stuff and how it works together. Okay, well, that's all we have for this month. Thank you, Ed. We've for you that are watching, we will be posting new posts the third Wednesday of every month. So it looks like October 20th will be our next visit. Between now and then, we're going to be pushing out a lot of engagement around this topic. So if you do have anything to add in this post, you'll have a way of connecting with us on that, and we will also be in different social media platforms. So thank you, Ed, for today, and we'll see you next month.
All right, see you next month, Alex.
Bye.
Ciao.